Trump's whole public life has been a volcano of lies. And in the tradition, lies are the sign of Satan, of the Antichrist. The Antichrist is a shortcut for evil. The word chaotic that you used, I think, is really a powerful word today. And it's interesting, in the 12th century, Hildegard of Bingen, who was a great mystic and healer and musician and many other things. But first of all, what are the sins of the spirit? Things like greed. There's a lot of that going around today. It's become institutionalized in our politics. Greed, acedia, which has been mistranslated as sloth, but Aquinas calls it the lack of energy to begin new things. So all world religions are saying we're capable of godlike activity, of love, forgiveness, beauty, and compassion and justice. Justice guarantees compassion because you need structures that are balanced and fair, or at least strive for it, in order that compassion can flow. But in fact, when you go deeper, you get lies, you get fear, you get like you have. Now, this book was born of an experience I had last summer. I was teaching for a week in Orvieto, Italy, and I went to visit the cathedral there. It's a very beautiful cathedral. And an Italian friend took me, didn't say a word, but took me to this large chapel inside the cathedral that had this huge fresco painted in 1501. And didn't say anything about it. I just stared. And the first thing I said out loud, I said, "It feels like Donald Trump."
Welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining us from Vallejo, California is Matthew Fox. And as you can see by Matthew's office, he's a busy writer. Matthew, good day to you. How are you?
Yeah, a busy writer and not a real good fighter.
Well, it's a pleasure having you back on the show again. You've been on the show many times for previous books, and I think for our listeners, they're going to get a little bit of background about you, and then we're going to get into speaking with you about a couple of your books. But Matthew was an Episcopal priest. He's author of 43 books on culture and spirituality, including Original Blessings, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, A Spiritual Named Compassion, and The Reinvention of Work. His honors include the Abbey Courage of a Conscience Peace Award. Other recipients include the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, Rosa Parks, and Maya Angelou. And there's more here than I could say about Matthew. For you who want to learn more, just go to MatthewFox.com. We'll put a link up to the website as well. But today we have two books that we're going to discuss, and we've got a bridge in between these. I'm going to hold this one up, and we'll actually slide this across the screen for those listeners out there. It's called The Tao of the Thomas Aquinas, Fierce Wisdom for Hard Times, which we all could use right now. And then this other kind of opposing book is Trump, the MAGA Movement, or the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. Interestingly, the tough times might have been caused by the Antichrist. So, but at any rate, I think it's all perspective. But Matthew, welcome back to the show. We'll put links to the previous shows as well. It's always an honor to have you on. I know you wrote me about being on actually quite some time ago about that book that you had on Trump, the MAGA Movement as Antichrist. And I didn't respond in time, but here we are. It's never too late. So look, in the Tao of Thomas Aquinas, you kind of present Aquinas as a bold, revolutionary thinker rather than this rigid, systemized kind of person that he's portrayed as. What inspired you to kind of reclaim this version of Aquinas, and why do you think his true character has been obscured throughout history. It is an interesting one, and I think for scholars and non-scholars alike, this pertains to people we're kind of moving through everyday life, right?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for your program, Peg. It's been a while, but I love how your program has grown and kept up with the social media
Yeah,
revolution.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
good to see you again. Um, yes, I think Aquinas has gotten a bad eye, if you will, because he was invoked for a couple of years as kind of an orthodox hatchet man to keep people in line. Um, but I actually studied with one of the greatest Aquinas scholars ever, Father Chenu, Chenu, a French Dominican and great historian, and he had his take on Aquinas was very much his own inspiration. Uh, the prophetic side of Aquinas um, rarely comes through when you're dealing with dogma and where you're repeating the scholastic modality of his Summa Theologica. But what I did in my book that preceded this one, The Sheer Joy, is a very big one. I translated books that had never been in English or German or French or even Italian before, written by Aquinas, especially his commentaries on scripture, like Jeremiah and Isaiah and all this, and the Psalms. And I found him there to be so much more free-minded because he was liberated from the scholastic structure, you see. And the scholastic structure can keep him very cold and impersonal. And whereas his real passion and soul really come through, it comes through in a lot of his teachings that you find in the scholastic documents, but they really come through in his commentaries on scripture. For example, he says, uh, the fire that Jesus came to set on the earth is compassion. Compassion is the fire that Jesus came to set in the earth. And what I set out to do in this small book and very readable book, as you say, is to take one sentence from Aquinas. Each chapter title is a sentence from Aquinas.
Mhm.
And each sentence, I think, is enough to wake you up. Um, he says, for example, the true uh, first and primary meaning of salvation is this: to preserve things in the good. So he's not saying anything about heaven and hell. He's saying the first and primary meaning is to preserve things in the good. Well, isn't that what the whole ecological movement has to be about? Isn't that what we're fighting with global warming? We're not preserving things in the good for future generations, not only of humans, but of animals and sea creatures and all the rest. The rainforest, we're tearing it all down. We're not preserving the good. Now, if that's not a 21st century definition of salvation, I've never heard of one.
Well,
And he says,
that's a good one, actually. You know,
they're all good.
you talk about his scholarliness and him not getting this, recognition, right? And
Yeah.
it drew me to this comment by a lady who authored a book, Stop Seeking, Start Finding. Jan Phillips, she was a nun in the Catholic Church. You maybe don't know her or you don't know her at all, but she was recently on. And she spoke about when she was becoming a nun, the priest would come in, and in this one class, when these young women were about 18 years old, and this relates directly to the scholarliness of this, there were, he said, look, you have to learn how to be spiritual. We're not going to use any of the books. All the books are going on the top shelf, she said. She said all these 18-year-old little girls who are going to become nuns were like, oh my God, we don't know because we're programmed. We need to read all these books. And he said, no, you're going to learn how to be spiritual in my class. And it doesn't require that you read all of those books. Now, I think that was a really kind of interesting, unique approach. The reason I mentioned it is because, I think that when people sometimes come from such a scholarly standpoint, they get like a bad rap, right?
Mm.
And you write that the experience of God must not be restricted to the few or to the old. Now, this is the experience of God. How might Aquinas, in his democratic approach to spirituality, inform our understanding of this religious experience in today's fragmented society? Now, I would say instead of religious, I would say spiritual experience.
Right. Yes, and that is the first chapter, that quote that you cited. That's from Aquinas. The experience of God must not be restricted to the few or to the old. So again, he's talking about the experience, and that's not, as you say, religion so much as it is spirituality.
Right.
And what he's saying is that the experience of ecstasy, and that's the word he uses, is an experience of God. And he says where he gets that. He gets it from the Song of Songs, the beautiful book in the Hebrew Bible about lovemaking as a theophany, as mysticism. But of course, there have been people through the centuries who's tried to clean that book up and say, oh, no, it's not that. It's about God loving the church or God loving Jesus. But ask any Jew, ask Rabbi Heschel. The Jewish people are told on the Sabbath to do two things: read the Song of Songs and make love with their partner. So that's the tradition. And Aquinas picks up on that, where he says all our experiences of ecstasy are an experience of the divine, and it should not be restricted, as you said, to just the literate ones.
So why is it this vow of celibacy? And I get it. Jan was kicked out of the church because she was gay, and they found out she was having an affair with one of the other nuns. So literally, the Catholic Church kicked her out. So this kind of vow of celibacy, which has always been part of the Catholic religion and many of the Christian religions, and obviously you would know because you were there, you lived it. Um, what is it? Because Aquinas stated that sins of the flesh take you toward God, sins of the spirit take you away from God. This seems counterintuitive to traditional religious teachings. So I want you to kind of explain the distinction and how it might reshape our approach to morality, because that's a big one.
Right. Well, first of all, let me say that, of course, celibacy has not always been part of the Christian um, demand on clergy. That, after all, St. Peter and all the early church were married except for Paul. And so this came later in the church, and it became a law in the 12th century. So that's quite late, really. And then, of course, the Reformation undid it entirely. But back to your question, and Aquinas saying that sins of the spirit take you away from God, but sins of the flesh take you toward God. But first of all, what are the sins of the spirit? Things like greed. There's a lot of that going around today. It's become institutionalized in our politics. Greed, acedia, which has been mistranslated as sloth, but Aquinas calls it the lack of energy to begin new things. So it's like passivity. Couch potatoitis, that's acedia, the lack of energy to start new things, or to resist and revolt against current things that are off center. And of course, envy and hatred and cold-heartedness. So these and arrogance. I don't think pride is a sin. I think pride has been beaten up by too much bad theology. But arrogance is the source of racism and sexism and homophobia and all kinds of isms that we have floating around. So these are sins of the spirit. And that's why Aquinas say these things take you from God, because God is a God of justice and compassion and caring. But why does he say that sins of the flesh take you toward God? His key word in saying that is the word communion. Even the sins of the flesh are a search for communion. They're a search for unity and for reunion. And again, you have that in the Song of Songs, which has been described as the Genesis story rewritten. That it's a return to the Garden of Eden. It's a return to the spontaneity and the joy and the beauty of lovemaking in all of its forms.
Well, he was well ahead of his time, right?
He was way ahead of his time, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So, the thing is, though, I want to get to this question because it's really important, and not to interrupt you, but it goes along with what you were just speaking about. You know, this book, and I'm going to hold it back up for our audience, uh, emphasizes Aquinas' non-dualistic worldview, particularly regarding body, underline, soul, and soul, underline. How does this non-dualism challenge both religious fundamentalism and secular materialism in our current cultural climate? Now, here's what I've noticed. You have too, I'm sure. There's been a migration away from traditional religion toward more spirituality. However you want to define that. You know more about this than I do, although I observe it. You actually study it. Um, and what I see happening is not where young people today are bringing their kids up, taking them to church, right? Per se, they're finding their own path. It's almost like they're making it up. So it's a mixture of, Buddhism and a mixture of, Taoism and whatever it might be, Zen. And you see this happening more and more and more. What do you think's going on, and what do you think this non-dualistic worldview really, in this case with Aquinas, was all about?
well, first about the non-dualism. What Aquinas is doing is taking on Plato and Neoplatonists because they dominated. Aquinas lived in the 13th century. And from about the 3rd century on, the Neoplatonic philosophy really dominated in the intellectual life of Christianity. But Plato was dualistic. He separated spirit from matter.
Mhm.
And St. Augustine was his biggest disciple in the Christian church. And Augustine actually said, spirit is whatever is not matter. Well, that's Neoplatonic and it's utterly dualistic. And Aquinas said spirit is the elan and the vitality in everything, in a blade of grass, in a tree, in a horse, in us. So he's non-dualistic, and that's why he chose Aristotle over Plato as a foundational philosopher, because he says, Aristotle does not denigrate matter. That's what Aquinas said about Aristotle. And it's true, Aristotle was a scientist, and he talks about active potentiality, that they go together, that matter and spirit are form and matter, and they go together. And that's how our bodies work, and that's how things work in the world. So, from that point of view, Aquinas really was a revolution in the 13th century, and he got condemned for it. After he died, 3 bishops condemned him, 2 in Oxford and 1 in Paris, where he was actually teaching. So, it was very controversial, but he really hung in there with that. But now your question about religion versus spirituality. Obviously, the Christian religion has played a tremendous historical role in the West. And when European Christians, so called, came to the Americas, because Columbus got lost and ended up here, he did not discover America. It had been discovered a long time before these continents, we now know. But the fact is, though, he brought with him these missionary types. And their whole emphasis was on redemption. What they did to these indigenous people was horrible. The numbers went from 80 million when he landed to about 8 or 10 million after a few generations. Now, a lot of it was disease and not intentional, but a lot of it was intentional, etc. So the church carries a big burden. Organized religion does when it gets wrapped up in politics, which of course takes us to today's situation that you want to talk about soon. But the point is that um, as more and more Westerners read our history and the church's involvement in it, it is not at all edifying or pretty. For example, these stories that have come out with us for years about the indigenous schools
Yeah.
in Canada and the United States, where they rip these kids from their parents, from their culture, from their language, from their religion, and put them all into these schools and beat them to to beat the language out of them and everything else. I mean, horrible things. Now, they were done in the name of the church. Some were church schools, but some were government schools. So they're also done in the name of the American government. But in any case, it's obviously colonialism at its worst. And those realities have to be addressed. Now, to his credit, Pope Francis apologized for the document written in the 15th century, right at the time that Columbus was setting sail for the first time, which is called the Doctrine of Discovery, which gave permission to the kings and queens of Portugal and Spain and so forth, who were Catholic countries, supposedly, to steal Africans from Africa and to abuse the indigenous people of the Americas because, according to those popes of the 15th century, they were pagan and they were not Christians, so what do they know about God? So that horrible green light was given in the name of papal encyclicals in the 15th century. Well, Pope Francis finally, here in the 21st century, apologized. But, apologies are not enough. You have to look harder at these traditions and say, how did this happen? That the Christian church went from being a persecuted church by their own empire in the first century to being a persecuting church in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. And a lot of people are, and then also how much life, that is, how much spirituality is there in the current structures. I do think we've had Pope Francis was a good pope. I think I have hope for this new pope. I think that trying to recover the healthy teachings of Christianity and practices is a real important effort today. And the fact is that Catholic Church is one of the oldest organizations in the world and largest in terms of being present on all the continents. So, humanity can't just throw off its past that easily. It has to renew it. That's what the Vatican Council tried to do in the 60s. And then two popes for 34 years resisted that. And now, but with Pope Francis and this pope, I think they will try to bring out a new version of Christianity that is closer to the teachings of Jesus, and one that's ecumenical, that finds the wisdom in Buddhism and in other churches and so forth.
I hope you're right, because we need a major shift. We need a seismic shift in what's going on. And, that leads us now to kind of this book. Okay. So this is Trump and the MAGA movement and as Antichrist. And, for as long as I've been alive, and I'm not quite as old as you, but close, I've seen religions, and I'm just going to say this, it's my podcast, do more to divide people than actually unite and bring people together. I've also seen this Antichrist raise its head so many times through leaders throughout countries, not just Trump. I'm talking about leaders in all other areas that want to repress populations of people from expression, abilities to express themselves. Pope Paul, the list goes on and on and on. We can see where these improprieties to so many people, to control their thinking, to control what they are, is there. So in both books, you explore this concept as Christ as an archetype. And so how does your understanding of the Christ archetype inform the interpretation of what we're referring to and what I've just talked about is the Antichrist archetype? And how do you apply that to contemporary politics? Because I'm just going to say, for anyone who listens to this show, they're probably in an age range where, they're in their 30s to their 70s or maybe 80s. They've seen enough of this. And I would say most people are fed up.
Yes. And I'll say too, in all my writings, I don't know if I've ever talked about the Antichrist before this book, because that term Antichrist has been owned and hijacked by the very right wing, the fundamentalist version of Christianity. And I'm nowhere in that circle.
Well, until Trump came along.
Until Trump came along, and not just Trump, but his Christian nationalism and his enablers who claim that they're Christians
And
And
you
yet
want
they're
to
doing
know
the
something?
opposite.
Do you want to know something, Matthew,
But
that we've seen? Now I know you and Dennis, who's there. This is important to note. My listeners need to note this. So when we take this podcast and we put it on YouTube and we put ads on YouTube that say something negative, YouTube doesn't approve it.
Mm.
Okay?
Negative about what?
The censorship is alive and well
Wow.
in these companies.
Wow. At this
Because of the fear of the repercussions of Donald Trump.
Well, that's what I say. The first sign of the
People gotta wake up.
is fear.
Yeah.
The spread of fear and lies.
Yeah.
And of course, Trump's whole public life has been a volcano of lies. And in the tradition, lies are the sign of Satan, of the Antichrist. See, Antichrist is a shortcut for evil, but it's an archetype. And Carl Jung wrote about it as an archetype, and he said it's very attractive because it leads with what you think is spiritual power and beauty. But in fact, when you go deeper, you get lies, you get fear, you get like you have now. This book was born of an experience I had last summer. I was teaching for a week in Orvieto, Italy, and I went to visit the cathedral there. It's a very beautiful cathedral. And an Italian friend took me, didn't say a word, but took me to this large chapel inside the cathedral that had this huge fresco painted in 1501. And didn't say anything about it. I just stared. And the first thing I said out loud, I said, "It feels like Donald Trump." Then I looked at the title, and the title said Antichrist, Deeds and Preaching. And there were I counted 172 figures in the painting. And I'm glad we're going to show the painting because in the background, there are these ninja figures, young people in black. One interpreter said, this is the Ku Klux Klan in black instead of white. But to me, it pictures exactly Musk's teams that are going around destroying U.S. aid, destroying Social Security, destroying Medicaid and all the rest. That, I mean, it's unbelievably intuitive, if you will, and prophetic. But that is where I said it's time for the left to pick up on the language of the archetype of the Antichrist. Because obviously the archetype of the Christ stands for justice and peace and beauty and goodness, and all those things we can project on Christ, or you can project it on Isaiah or on the Buddha, or wherever you want to project it on, but that's what Christ is. But the Antichrist would be the opposite of those things. Not truth, but lies, not light, but darkness, not joy, but control, not love, but hate. And I mean, this whole system now, and then Project 2025, and I have 2 chapters on that in this book. You can see there, and what's in stake for us, and what is really going on. That's the blueprint, and it is a fascist blueprint. And remember that fascism is intrinsic, what I call Christofascism. There is a fascist movement in Christianity. In the Catholic Church, the Opus Dei is a very obvious example of that. And it is through the Opus Dei that we have people like the 6 far-right Supreme Court judges we have. They came through Leonardo Leo, who was very influenced by that right-wing fascist movement begun by a fascist priest in fascist Spain in the 1920s. That's that movement. And it was pushed by Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI, but not Francis. He didn't make any fascist cardinal or bishop a cardinal, including the bishop of the largest diocese in North America, which is Los Angeles. That fellow, the archbishop there, went to a Opus Dei seminary, etc. So we have to name these movements in religion. And it's not just, of course, Christianity. It's the evangelical wing, of course, of the fundamentalists and Protestants too, who are so out front in this administration. One of them we know, who has an office in the West Wing, where she's putting her version of religion and Christianity into the mix, and because he's close to Trump. And so there is a very sick religion involved in this whole movement of neo-fascism that America is inventing at this time.
Well, and I'm happy that you've disclosed it through this book. And I think that, disclosure like this, one of the things I want to talk with you about is you've written extensively about what you call creation spirituality. Um, how does this perspective kind of inform both the reading of Aquinas, and your critique of contemporary politics? Because that really, your new evolution of creation spirituality is something people need to know about versus all of this dogma that has been fed through all of these other sources. And as you were speaking about, the fascism that exists, that I don't think many people really have an awareness of. That the politics and the fascism that's going on in the political system is alive and well. Okay.
Yes, and a lot of it is wrapped in religious covering. Yes, well, Aquinas was so in love with creation. He takes this line from the Psalm. The Psalm says, "They should be drunk with the beauty of thy house." And he says that is the universe. That we're here to get drunk on the universe. Now, what a moment in history to get drunk on the universe. When we've discovered in our lifetime, the universe is 2 trillion galaxies big, each with hundreds of billions of stars. We're receiving daily these amazing pictures and stories through Webb telescope and so forth about the history of this universe. It is such a time for the human mind to explode with this new creation story from science about how we got here, how Earth got here, how special Earth is, how our sun came along at the right time, and the moon, etc., etc. It's just full of miracles. If you define miracles as experiences of the sacred, and marvels, as Einstein defined miracles as marvels. Yes, it's a marvel that we're here at all, and it took 13.8 billion years. So this is a way for us to start over, because this new creation story from science, it holds all people and all religions and all cultures together. That's when you look at creation stories in the history of humanity, these are what keep tribes together. And now we are one tribe trying to survive on a planet that we're destroying. And hey, let's wake up. It's just what you said. We need a seismic shift. Here is the shift. And again, Aquinas said, 13th century, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, nature and the Bible, not just the Bible. Since the 16th century, all of Protestantism told us that Revelation is in the Bible. It's all in that one book. Well, it ain't. It's in science. Because it's in nature. And we need both things humming. And besides, now we all know there are many Bibles. There are many sacred books. There are the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Tao Te Ching, and so many scriptures, sacred books around the world. We can honor them all. There's the Quran. And look, what do they have in common? What they all have in common is they're trying to teach humanity that we're capable of compassion. The most used adjective in the Quran for Allah is Allah, the compassionate one. And in Judaism, compassion is the secret name for God. And Jesus, being a Jew, let the secret out of the bag in Luke 6 when he says, "Be you compassionate as your Creator in heaven is compassionate." So all world religions are saying we're capable of godlike activity, of love, forgiveness, beauty, and compassion and justice. Justice guarantees compassion because you need structures that are balanced and fair, or at least strive for it, in order that compassion can flow. So this is a time we're living in, and this is where spirituality really comes alive. And this is where the Project 2025 is the opposite of what Christ is teaching, and all major religions are teaching, because it is about a small, powerful group. Now we're seeing their names and their bank accounts. These are the billionaires in America who want $400 billion deal, less taxes. But of course, who's going to pay for that? It's the poor and the middle class. We're already paying for it. So that's what's going on in American politics. And that's why you can say it's about the Christ archetype, the Christ energy versus the Antichrist energy.
What is it? I mean, look, social media has played such a big role in this whole evolution of, we can go back to the election of Donald Trump, and see that social media played a big role. You and I are on social media today. We're on a channel which is, I thankfully say, is espousing goodwill and compassion and hope and understanding. And it's one of the reasons I still do it, because the airwaves are so filled with so much of the other stuff. And that stuff created the chasm, which created the divide. And so, what I would like to ask you about is, you know, we find people taking these roles and doing just heinous acts of crime on other folks as a result of being influenced by what's going on in just even social media or the airwaves. You describe the Antichrist as seductive and alluring. Um, what spiritual practices or perspectives do you believe help people resist these attractions and return to what you call biophilia rather than necrophobia or necrophilia? Hopefully I said that right, but I get what you mean. The point is that, are we going to return to some place where it's we treat our brothers and sisters with understanding, with compassion, with the kind of things that bring the world together, not divide them. We've seen so much, though, Matthew, and it hits in so many different areas in the airwaves. Every day, something happens, some shooting at a school or somebody shooting up somebody else, and it just seems like it is chaotic. What do you, I know you don't have a prescription for this, but maybe you have some kind words that might get out in the airways to help our listeners see that this isn't really the world we live in.
The word chaotic that you used, I think, is really a powerful word today. And it's interesting, in the 12th century, Hildegard of Bingen, who was a great mystic and healer and musician and many other things, she painted a picture of the Antichrist. So we talked earlier of the 16th century picture, but this is a 12th century picture. And she's also now declared a saint and doctor of the church. But in her picture, she has three different sections, but in one of them there are these animals, and she says what they stand for. These wild animals. One stands for greed, one stands for warlikeness, and so forth. And she says they're chewing on a rope, and she says these creatures, these energies, are decoupling, they're unraveling the order of the universe. Mm-hmm. So that's what chaos is, isn't it? The unraveling of the order of the universe. Yeah. And these for her, therefore, are symbols of Antichrist too. And so our powers for unraveling the universe versus our powers for creating community, for bringing us together. And that's, of course, I think what the American Constitution tried to do 250 years ago. It was imperfect for sure, and it took a civil war, and it took the civil rights movement of the mid 20th century and all this to bring in. It took women marching for what was it, 50 years before they could get in on the action. So I mean, it took a lot of work and energy over the centuries to bring it to a fuller expression. And then, of course, in the last 40 years, they've been undoing it. Citizens United is, I think, number one contribution to undoing the order, because Citizens United invited all these billionaires and all these corporations to jump in and put up as much money as they want to promote their particular political agenda. And so this is what we're fighting with today. It's very serious. It is about whether America will be a democracy um, and a better democracy, or whether it's going to just yield to this oligarchy, to authoritarianism, to a rule of the few, by the few, and for the few. And that is what is the agenda in this latest budget proposal from the Republicans in Congress. I really can't. It's so hard to believe, but that politicians have so sold their soul to this alluring Antichrist figure of our time that they don't even care that they're going to be putting millions of people. The number I saw lately is 13 million people off of insurance, health insurance, with this latest bill of theirs. Just think about that: 13 million people, and then snap money for poverty, people living in poverty, for their food, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, they did this thing already with USAID. They're literally killing millions of people in Africa today that we weren't killing 6 months ago, because they took away the money for inoculations of vaccines and food for the poorest of the poor in Africa, et cetera. So we humans, we are capable of so much beauty and grace and goodness on the one hand, and we need people like the Buddha and Lao Tzu and Jesus and Muhammad and Isaiah and White Buffalo Woman and Sojourner Truth to come along and remind us that we're capable of that stuff. It's called compassion and justice. Or we're also capable of unraveling the order of our society and of our times. That's why I talk about the dark night of the soul that we're in. It's a dark night of society and a dark night of our species, because we are facing our own extinction with global warming. And we have a party in the White House now that is in complete denial about global warming. They want to drill, baby, drill. And what does that mean for our grandchildren? What does it mean for the future of other species? Hundreds of millions of species are going extinct at this time because of humans. Now, it's just what you said. We need a seismic shift. And that's what real spirituality is about. It is about waking up.
Is there anybody, Matthew, and I don't believe it's one person, but is there any entity, one person that can carry the message such that the individual people of the close to 9 billion people on this planet, even if we reached part of them, could actually elevate consciousness to a level that they could see the world in a different light? Because we have so many areas where, even in our country, the United States, people are at, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're at survival level, right? And when you're at these levels, you're not at the level of consciousness where you can re-see the world in a new way, right? It's like if we went to Africa, if we went to all Sudan, look at the reports coming out of Sudan, the number of kids that are just starving right now because there is no aid in there. There is no water. Look, we could go on infinitum about this. The point that I would like to make, and the question that I would like to ask you, if somebody wants to bring God into their heart so that they could have this reunion with God, because so many people haven't made that union. They're mechanistic about what they're doing. They just go about whatever it is. And that's what this party seems like. The party that's in rule today seems very mechanistic, very like nothing else matters. We just got to do it for the money. We don't care about the people. You get what I'm talking about. In your humble opinion, not that you have an answer, but you've studied enough, what might flip the tide?
Well, moral outreach.
More out.
And it's got to be from grassroots. Got to be from grassroots. And but actually from every angle. Those who have power in the structure, whether in people like yourself with a platform, and there are many others with platforms today, and newspapers. So journalism and writing and so forth. But also even here we have a new pope, and given today's realities, of how the papacy is made for television, it just is, because there's one person who's got all this familiarity. But I mean, if he can speak with in tandem with the leaders of Buddhism and the leaders of other Christian denominations. I noticed that even Mormons sent a representative to the funeral of the previous pope. Well, that's kind of a breakthrough.
That's interesting. I didn't see
It
that.
is interesting. So all those who have a voice, but above all, it's the grassroots, people that have to wake up and take on their own adulthood, their own sense of responsibility. Um, and um, and so that's the question, whether our species can survive or not. And to survive, we have to get this awakening going at all levels of society, and certainly at the grassroots. This is what's going to change politics in America if it's not too late. And there are people who are speaking out. I think of Tom Hartman. He did a piece on my interview with me on my Trump book, for example. Rachel Maddow and people who have these programs that some people listen to. But again, it has to, and of course, artists. This is what artists do: films and TV programs and so forth. That this is the artist's job to bring the prophetic. Rabbi Heschel says that the prophet interferes. So we all have to be asking, how can we interfere? Well, these groups all over the country and all cities that are protesting the demise of Medicaid, the demise of Social Security, etc., attacks on the young and on education, these are stirring things up. They have to. That's where we have to find our hope. My definition of hope comes from the eco-philosopher who says, hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up.
I
So
like it.
I like your question. It's about action. Where's the work? How can we bring this forward in our work? Lawyers, for example, on the one where we have some big legal companies yielding to the Trump situation and just bowing down and offering him all kinds of free lawyership. But on the other hand, some legal firms are saying, no, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. The same is true as our justice system at other levels. So there's so many levels where this has to play out, but every one of us has to do our share of contributing, of interfering, because spiritual adulthood is both about love and moral outrage. It's saying yes and no. Yes to biophilia, love of life, and no to all this pseudo noise that is about not a government of and by for the people, but of, by, and for the billionaires.
You said a lot, and in that, as I'm reflecting, there's been statements many times that this administration's job is to create lots of chaos and confusion. And the reason they do that is because it distracts people from even understanding where they're going, so that they can reprogram people to think that they are the saviors. Okay? Now, whether that's accurate or not isn't important. What is the challenge is that you've given warnings in your second book, but you also give hope for the future. And I love the fact that you're giving hope for the future, because we don't want to be Debbie Downers here. We want to talk about what can be. Are there signs that the Christ archetype at work in contemporary movements or leaders that offer a counterbalance to what you've identified as the Antichrist? In other words, where is it, Matthew?
Well, I find a lot of it among the young. I think the young are beginning to question everything. And what kind of a country do we have? One of their basic question is, do we want to bring a child into the world?
Yeah.
There are a lot of young couples in their 20s asking that serious question. But it wasn't even people's minds when I was, a young
Right.
man. It was,
Right.
of course, we want to bring young people in this country and into the world. So this just underscores, I think, the seriousness of what we're facing. But a lot of young people are feeling, I think, a call, and many are are going beyond academia as we know it. They don't want to get a college degree. It puts them in too much debt, etc. And besides, half the universities are yielding to the Antichrist agenda just to play safe, to be safe. And but some are beginning to stand up now, finally. But so the whole thing needs so much alternative. We need our creativity and imagination. And we do have tools, the social media, obviously, and these other inventions that have happened in our lifetime are ways to democratize, to get the word out to greater numbers. And I was kind of touched when you know, they asked the cardinal from Hong Kong, who I do not know at all, but he looks like a young man, actually. But they asked him what happened at the conclave electing this new pope, and he said, "We elected a pastor for the world, pastor for the world." So, so I thought that was a pretty nice angle from an Asian about this thing that's been going on for 2,000 years in Rome, which is, getting a spokesperson out there, supposedly standing for the values that Jesus stood for, in contrast to the statues of values that the Antichrist stands for. But this is just one example, I think, of how the word gets out today. We are more and more of a global village. And we can draw on the wisdom of all our traditions, including secular traditions, including science for sure. We got a new pot to work from today. And it can't be done without science. It can't be done without artists. It can't be done without journalists and media. It can't be done without good teachers. And that means parenting, because a lot of parenting is teaching and passing on values, and grandparenting too, and good citizenship. I mean, all of these works are, these professions are involved in this awakening, this resurrection.
That's it. I like the fact that you are saying awakening and there is hope. And there is a theory that has been talked about for, and I don't want to call it a theory or a postulate, that Trump was was elected at this particular time because we needed this disruption to make this seismic change. Now, I don't know if I believe that, but I do understand what people are saying. Were we on course or were we off course? And if there is a course, what is the course? Right? And I think right now the confusion and uncertainty that this administration has created, just here in the US, but I think you look at other countries as well, they're all dealing with their own issues. But it seems like worldwide turmoil in some respects, right? We're seeing China having difficulty with their economy, US now because of this trade imbalance. You go to all these other countries, and I'm not saying the whole world falling apart. I'm saying, were we supposed to, at this time, by God, have been shaken up to actually rethink fundamentally who we are as a species and how we potentially will treat this planet so that we can survive, or are we going to perish in the process?
Said, and that's what I mean by the dark night of our species. That what the mystics teach about the dark night is that it's like a school, it's an occasion to really become transformed and to wake up. There's a beautiful teaching by Hafiz, the Sufi mystic of the 13th century. He says, sometimes God wants to do us a great favor, turn us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But most everyone I know, he says, who sees God in such a playful, drunken mood, quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. I just love that passage because it laughs. It made you laugh. It laughs at the dark night of the soul. We're being turned upside down as a species to shake all the nonsense out, to grow up. I think we've been adolescent Homo sapiens for long enough, and we have to move into our adulthood now, or we're not going to make it. And one thing I meditate on a lot these days is all these cousins of ours that we're discovering. We knew about Neanderthal, We knew about the Denersons, but now we're naming, I think, a dozen others that we found. We're finding, especially in Asia, all of our cousins. And what they all have in common is they're extinct. We're the last ones standing. So there has to be a lesson there someplace for the Chinese, for the atheists, for the Americans, for the Africans. Hey, this is our last rodeo. This is our last time around. We've got to wake up and shake up. And there's a great teaching in Aquinas, to go back to the little Aquinas book. He says there are two resurrections. The first is waking up in this lifetime. And if you pay attention to that, you don't have to worry about the second. I really love that teaching, because I'd never heard it before, that there were two resurrections. I thought it was all about after you die. No, he says, waking up, just the word you've been using, I've been using, that itself is a resurrection. And that's where we should be putting our energies. And of course, we have to reinvent politics, law, academia, education, religion.
Yeah.
The whole caboodle has to be reinvented. But hey, what a marvelous task to be called to do. What a moment to be alive in history.
And have the opportunity to actually participate in this reinvention is actually a gift. And I want to leave our show today saying that, Matthew, you've been a gift to my audience. Your wisdom, your understanding, your knowledge is always something that actually shifts my perspective. You give me a different way to look at things. And I hope my listeners today found the same thing happen as a result of us speaking about two kind of different books, but this one, and that is the MAGA Movement as Antichrist, and the Tao of Thomas Aquinas. So these two books, we're going to have Matthew back on, because we're going to speak actually about a book that he sent me as well, The Reinvention of Work. Now this one, we're not going to do today, but we will get to it. And the reason I was so interested in this one is, even though this one is a little bit old, it's one of his older books, we all have work to do. We have lots of work to do. And the question is, as we said, if we reinvent ourselves, what is that reinvention going to look like? And then we're going to be putting him on for this one as well. This is Juliana of Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond. And we all know we went through pandemic, but the reality is, I had a gentleman on this morning, Matthew, who literally had an awakening as a result, because he was put in ICU, and the priest called him on the phone and wanted to read him his last rites. And he is doing such amazing work now, after he came with this near-death experience, got out of the COVID, and completely since COVID has changed everything in the way in which he's doing. So, I think awakening comes in different ways for different people. That was truly awakening of one soul that's trying to change so many other souls as a result of his NED, right? And so,
Beautiful story.
yeah.
That's
So,
great.
any other comments you have for our listeners before we wrap up? Or are you good with
Well, I'll leave you with one short sentence from Aquinas. Joy is a human's noblest act. Joy is a human's noblest act. To bring joy back into politics, education, family life, art, this is part of the awakening too. There's a struggle, there's work, but there's also a path that we're on that includes joy. You got to make room for the biophilia, the love of life. That's the joy, isn't it? Drink it in like a camel drinks in water at an oasis before going across that desert, before going through the dark night. You got to fill the hump of our souls with joy to make it through dark times like we're in.
Well, and I think, and I'll end on this, frequently, for many of my listeners, they probably speak to God and God doesn't respond. And they speak to God again and he doesn't respond. And they speak to him again and he doesn't respond. And he isn't playing a joke on you. He's waiting for you to be ready to actually hear. And what I'd say is if whatever method you're using, whether it's prayer or it's meditation or it's picking up a book like this and sticking your finger in it and saying, this is what I need to read here, this paragraph, because I need to reflect on that, just like you did with this book, right? That's really it. So each and every day we have an opportunity for that joy. And the joy is in asking for help. And I certainly believe that God is there. I believe the angels are there. I think we're going to get through this, Matthew. Or as you said, we're going to go extinct. So thank you so much for being on Inside Personal Growth. Namaste to you and to Dennis. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you.